next I'm going to invite our chair, Dion Flannery, up for the traditional fireside chat. So Dion, please join me in the chairs here. Good morning again.
Good morning.
As RAA chairman, you see all the issues of place and how we tackle them. So I'll start, I think Mark said Captain Obvious. I'm going to start with the Captain Obvious question. What's the core issue that you believe the industry is facing?
Well, I take a step back. It is fairly obvious, but it's important to recognize, you made mention of it in your opening remarks about where we were last year versus where we are today. And very thankful to say that the pandemic is done. I know the administration on 60 Minutes admitted that the pandemic is behind this nation, which was helpful to hear. It's evidential. You fly today, masks are still around. I think they're around for forever in one aspect or another in culture today. But generally speaking, it feels refreshing to be back and seeing travel the way it used to look and feel, which is crowded airports, busy operations, et cetera. But the reality is while the pandemic may have been weaning out, it left behind a smaller regional airline industry, and not everybody made it out. And some quality institutions, well administered and pridefully built airlines are not here today as a result of COVID and the pandemic. And again, we've been reverent and thankful and appreciative of PSP and the government's unilateral support of the industry, not once, not twice, but 3 times through payroll support. And that's all in the rearview mirror now, and it was critical for sustainment of the industry. But today, we've moved from a pending pilot shortage problem to an exacerbated crisis. And I think we can at least say that people are not denying it anymore. It's in front of everybody, communities in particular, understand it and feel it. And I think the next step is we have to own it together. There's no more competing it against one another. There's no more value in hoping. Hoping is a very poor strategy for fixing problems. And we've got to just really embrace the fact that, as Mark mentioned, communities are every day being served less and less. And what that does to communities in particular is incredibly negative. And so that's the problem facing the industry today is how do we reestablish the hard-built network of regional service in our communities and uphold the brand value of network carriers in the United States.
And those are communities that they just can't reach without us. We know that that air service is just not going to be backfilled. So why don't we start right from the top with your own views, and we're going to be talking about this a lot today, but how do we solve it? What are the steps that we need to take now and in the short term and long term to solve this problem?
Well, the first, again, cliche, the first way to solve a problem is admit you have a problem, right? And for the last 2.5 years, there's been wide-ranging debate about whether there's a shortage or not. That's an old argument that, quite frankly, is dismissible now for certain. So we have a problem. How are we going to fix it? We need to strongly advocate for science-based solutions to the core issue, not political ones. We need communities actively involved in defending and representing their air service and the criticality that it plays for all the business and leisure interests in those communities. And we need to go back to basics. We had a law that was put in place over a decade ago. We have an abundance of data as to what that law, both intended and unintended consequence of that law. And we need to, as a aviation community, go back to the data and see what it tells us. Are we really on a path to creating the best qualified pilots in the world? And it's personally my view that absolutely we're not.
Yeah, I think that's so well stated, and I think that gets lost in some of this. And it's not just, we've almost done a disservice just talking about pilot shortage and pilot training in the same breath. Two things can be important at the same time. And it's really important to bring that focus back on safety, because we're not just trying to make things safer. It's my view that we're curing risk that was introduced with this long lapse in structured training, and you all see that. So I think it's really important for us to emphasize that.
Agreed. And over that same decade, the advancements in safety systems at the 121 carriers in particular is remarkable. I've been 8 years now at PSA, and knew what SMS was the day that I walked in the door, but have a profound understanding and appreciation for the energy that goes into a safety management system every day, the commitment to a safety culture, continuous improvement in selection of folks that you can invite to be part of your team, immersion training and safety feedback to get everything. We say it to every new hire that comes in. We have a host of manuals. Those manuals are your key to mitigating risk. Know them, understand them, and use them. And when you do, you're doing the very best thing you possibly can to avoid an incident or an accident. However, if any point in time you see something that you experience something that's not in a manual, you have a chance to put your fingerprints on a safety advancement. And we encourage them from the first day they come in the building to do that. And I think if you compound that type of approach to safety, not just on the cockpit or on the flight deck, but in every aspect of the business, and you take it out over time like we have seen for the last 10, 12 years, you really have a remarkably safe culture. And proud of the one that we've produced at PSA, and we're not alone. We know this industry as a whole, there's been incredible advances in safety management at every carrier.
That's such an important topic, and we'll be talking about it a lot over the next couple of days and at our board meeting upcoming too. Pilots get all the headlines, and without them, we can't serve these communities, and we've seen those consequences. But last year, the CEO panel, everyone really acknowledged that these are issues that are throughout all work groups. AMTs in particular have been hard to recruit. But can you talk about that? I mean, what's changed since last year, and what still needs to change?
Yeah, I would start with, the rather blunt but obvious statement. If you don't have pilots, you don't need mechanics. You don't need in-flight. You don't need as much management. Those are just, it's math, as we say. And that's the knock-on effect here. That's how, apart from the loss of value in the communities, there's just real hardship that comes to the organizations in terms of the opportunities that we can present and provide for licensed professionals, including AMTs. And so you're absolutely correct. We see the same trends on the mechanical side, the tech ops side of the business as we do the pilots. Major carriers and cargo carriers are snapping up experienced mechanics. We went from having at PSA pre-pandemic about 35% of our mechanics on assigned behind status, meaning they were in some structured OJT at any point in time. That went to 0% during the pandemic, which was an incredible luxury to have an environment where planes still needed to be maintained, whether there were 75 or 5 people on an aircraft flying. And we used that environment to build skills, build experience. And now that experience is being rated by major carriers in particular. And so we have to replace them. But it's somewhat being muted by the fact that, as we mentioned, aircraft are on the ground for a lack of flight crew. We're essentially riding an attrition wave on the mechanic side. And if we ever fix the flight crew aspect of it, that's the next emerging emergency, is where are the technicians. And so work continues to build pipelines to advocate for the profession. It's still a noble cause. It's competing against all sorts of other technical jobs. Wages are on the rise there as well. Again, it's a second derivative, but closely second derivative to the pilot shortage.
Yeah, when we saw that, I mean, that's such a good point with, unfortunately, the carriers that didn't make it through. All of those flight attendants and dispatch and safety professionals and others, it's more than just pilots. On the AMT, one bright spot is later this week, the Part 147 rewrite will be final. And that will be very welcome news. We can start to actually train AMTs for the technology and the aircraft that they'll be maintaining now, and not from some decades ago. So some bright spot. And I think the other thing is just the focus on vocational schools and that pathway. One of the other things that we've talked about is diversity. I don't know the figure offhand how many AMTs are women. We know pilots less than 9%.
Right.
You've done some really interesting things, and you and I talk about these a lot during our many one-on-ones. Tell us a little bit about what PSA is doing meaningfully on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because this industry has for a couple of decades talked about and strived to make our flight decks and hangars and other places look just like our cabins and just like America. But we haven't always made the progress we need to make. So tell us what you're doing and how you want to change that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, 2 years ago, as we sort of had a rush on all things, equity and inclusion, I think a lot of folks were caught off guard, so to speak, and put their guard up, right? Got defensive about it and said, I'm not doing anything wrong. I don't need to do these things. I think we, particularly at PSA, have pushed through that wonderfully, in so much as to say, maybe you did, maybe you were doing something wrong, maybe you weren't, but this is an opportunity for all of us to learn together and to make change, right? And make change for the better. And if you don't believe it's better to have a highly diverse, highly inclusive environment, let's talk about why. And we've engaged in those discussions. We've, of course, done a fair amount of work in connection with American in terms of learning environment, using our learning management system to cover the basics around bias and inequity. And more important than that, though, at PSA, we've put five specific swim lanes together in terms of initiatives to engage our employees in these efforts. It's one thing to do a module and to learn it and to get a passing grade on it. It's quite another to put yourself in action and go out and invest your personal time and your energy into an initiative around diversity and equity. I find that those things are the easiest and by far the most enriching and rewarding experiences. I had the opportunity to do one over a weekend in Charlotte about 5 months ago with a room about this size full of 12 to 16-year-old minority students and parents, and we got to talk to them about what a pilot career looked like, and couldn't be more proud to share the stage with 3 pilots, in particular 2 from PSA, who had gone on to major carriers and shared their experience, their life experience, their lived experience around what they faced to get to that point. And the encouragement and the support that was there for everybody in the audience was phenomenal. And these kids had a fantastic camp. They were energized, they were juiced about it, and again, the energy just came right back to me. This is not hard to do. In fact, it's really rewarding to do. So we encourage all of our directors to do 2 such events at least per year, and engage in the community. And those actions will do more to support the view that we're a better team and we're a more capable team the more diverse we become.
Those types of things are so important, and I bet most of you in the audience are doing them, and if you're not, I hope you'll consider it. I've been fortunate to be part of the Aero Club of Washington here in DC, and we all maybe overuse the phrase, you have to see it to be it, but that program is a brown bag lunch. They bring leaders from the community. They endeavor to make the leaders look like the kids that they're talking to, and they tell their story. This is how I got here, and you could do this too. On a broader scale, Barrington Irving is doing a great job with his flying classroom. There are just a couple of examples, but we've made this career really attractive. There's never been a better time to become a pilot or get into aviation generally. It has its challenges, but people want to fly. But we've got to do more to address the barriers of entry, and I think that's a real issue with diversity. Those outreach programs are so important, and the support once they're on the other side. But how, obviously we've got the higher ed bill that we're supportive of, and we hope to see that introduced this year. But I think that part of it is, we've really got to keep focusing on that.
100% agree. Yeah, we have to educate. We have to sort of illuminate the value of this career, but then we also have to take down the significant barriers in front of the vast majority of interested people in getting into this business, even if it's just getting certification to be a licensed mechanic. That provides enough headwinds that a lot of people get into it and abandon it, or don't even apply to start in that direction. We have to reduce the cost of entry to the vocation.
Absolutely. I think some people think, they're shocked to learn that you can't just go out and get a student loan to finance your flight education, for example. I mean, you can use the student loans, but it's not enough. Unlike a doctor or a lawyer, where some of that specialty training is in the postgraduate environment, for a pilot, the pool is very limited. And so there really is not equity fundamentally in the entrance to the career. And I think we'll make some progress on the pilot shortage and also on DEI when we can solve that problem. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So a number of regional airlines have revised their relationships with the main lines. or even changed mainline carriers. So do you think this is going to evolve further? And how are you looking at airline relationships, both from American, and give us the big picture?
Well, there's probably people that are in this room that are far more qualified to give you an answer to that than I am in particular. I know our relationship with American is one of transparency, and we talked about it last year, right? Lamenting the fact that we were working on schedules 45 days out. We were fighting crew bid deadlines on a regular basis, and ripping up and rebuilding and what have you. Today, thankfully, there's a little bit more visibility, and there's a little bit more opportunity for us to get it right. Unfortunately, it's not a good story, right? It's not one that's accretive. We're taking things apart and we're making adjustments. And the system as a whole is at an inflection point now where I think partners and their operators are trying to cover first base, right? How do you cover slots? How do you make certain that you have the critical aspects of your network covered and done with high level confidence so that you can deliver a level of service that is requisite. And again, it's not a good trend. It's one of declining returns, and that's got to get solved. At some point, you can't reduce the network. You don't, we've talked about it. You don't shrink your way to profitability in this business. Period. And we're past the point of having made some adjustments to the network. We're now at a point where across carriers and across majors, trying to find a way to make certain that we do in fact sustain the network as best we can.
Yeah, I think that point can't be made often enough. I mean, we sometimes, when I'm talking to reporters or lawmakers, that there's this canard out there that this was not profitable or the economics are upside down, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But these were profitable routes. Demand has never been higher, and in fact, in small communities, something I found interesting is, we look, probably most of you look at the TSA throughput every day, and small communities were actually leading. In terms of, they have fewer passengers, but those passengers were coming back in higher numbers. So it wasn't a matter of the communities not wanting the air service, not using the air service. These were well-used, healthy routes. We just don't have the pilots needed to supply all of them.
Absolutely. I mean, again, I started my career in pricing and revenue management 30 years ago, and so I sort of have a affinity for all things TRASM and PRASM and RASM, and it is remarkable what's happening domestically in the United States post-pandemic. Even during the late stages of the pandemic, it was evident that demand was effectively inelastic. And that's not, that's without being fully recovered from a corporate perspective, right? So the leisure side of things, and you could rationalize, well, that's 2+ years of pent up demand, and people are willing to spend at any cost. It's continuing though. We're seeing passengers that are on, multiple itineraries past their first post-COVID trip, and so you're 100% correct. The demand is there, and again, a consequence of a shrinking domestic network on the regional side is deeper than just people not being able to find the itinerary they want, or not being able to fly out of the airport that they would like to fly out, or paying more than they otherwise would prefer to pay. There's just a service situation here as well. If you do have a weather disruption, there are fewer and fewer opportunities to reaccommodate passengers, and the product value proposition is now in stark contrast. If you do have a disrupted situation, you've paid on a historical basis a higher fare than you would have, and you're perceiving that getting less product for what you paid for. So that's very real, and that's very alarming, and another consequence of a pilot shortage.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point, and I think I probably have told you this, but I've got a trip that I'm trying to make in a couple of weeks to a small community, and I'm giving a 45-minute talk, ironically, on the pilot shortage. And because of the pilot shortage and the changes that has brought, my flight has been changed a couple of times, and now I've got to go in, leaving at 5 a.m. on a Sunday for a talk I'm giving for 45 minutes in the afternoon on Monday. It's a 2-hour flight or so, and then I can't get back out until the next day. So for 45 minutes, it's a 3-day trip for me now. I really like the community, so I'm going to go. But I think that there are other business people who are probably saying, you know what, I can't do this. I don't want to be away from my home and family on a weekend for 3 days. I'm just one person. Multiply me by however many. And those are people that are either not making the trip and those airplanes, and they're not driving that economy, They're not going to that local business and supporting them. And maybe they are, and they're going on the roads. I saw this morning that the highway folks have released a slight decline in the traffic fatalities, but it's still over 20,000 in the first half of this year. And these people that don't have air service are being driven to the roads and the highways. And I think that's another consequence. We really need to be looking at safety in a multimodal way,
Right.
because it's not just disrupting economies, it's disrupting safety.
Yeah. Well, first, I'd like to thank you for your support of using air services, even in that itinerary, regardless of who you're flying. I really don't know. And I'm certain the hotels would like to thank you as well for taking an extra night on your trip to pay them, which is, quite frankly, we all know it. I mean, if you've stayed in a hotel recently, those guys are getting away with it. Price increases everywhere. Room occupancy targets are lower. They have effectively tweaked their model post-pandemic, and I don't see a lot of articles being written about that. Contrast that with the aviation system, which is just absolutely flooded, record load factors domestically, and again, as I said, a smaller base of operations to spread reaccommodation over. So that is tough. You're 100% correct, and that's what's important to these communities. I keep bringing back, and I know we're going to have panels on small community air service. Communities need to recognize that is the real danger here. Is you may have gone from 17 frequencies a day through 5 major hubs to 9 through 3, but what's your pattern of service look like, and how useful is that service for folks who were planning to come in for a day or a part of a day? Because when you lose that, you pass an inflection point, you lose a tremendous amount of invested value in your community. That continues for a period of time, and things get pretty bad. We've talked about it before. Cities, I think, really understand the value of the economic engine that an airport can produce. And in a shrinking level of service, they're losing payroll tax, they're losing new businesses, they're losing valuable VFR traffic, they're losing all of it, and it compounds quickly. And they're going to find themselves upside down, and that just let's stop that now before it becomes an eventuality.
Hear, hear. So just coming to that, and you've got a background in revenue management, but it's no secret that there are a lot of 50-seaters parked right now. There are a lot of regional aircraft parked. Some analysts and industry talking heads are saying the lack of pilots might foreshadow additional fleet changes in the coming years. And of course, there's new technology that we've been hearing about as well. Some of it is quite optimistic. So what's your view on how fleets will change? And on the revenue side, how much is the higher pilot pay going to factor into it? Yeah.
Well, I think it is, again, fairly easy to track and see. We lost, by changes to regulations, we lost a good portion of economic capability on small aircraft service to small communities, and now we're up in a couple notches on the ladder, and 50-seat aircraft are the latest constraint. And that's where we see the largest service cuts. Again, really pretty elementary here. Going to preserve as many ASMs and revenue-generating seats as you possibly can with every departure that requires a pilot or two. And so that's where things are headed. But there are a lot of large 2-class RJs that are getting parked as well. And you think about where we are, a product that's been heavily invested in by the majors, where you do in fact have all the amenities of a transcon narrow-body product effectively on a large regional jet, and those airplanes are not flying today. That's really remarkable. And again, I would. There are certain markets that are not going to support a 75-seat regional jet. They're still, profitable, substantially profitable, and can be operated with something smaller. But the pressure is on to produce as many seats with as few pilots as the industry has, and that will continue. I don't see the vertical takeoff in sort of near proximity initiatives as changing that equation. Again, there's even with pilot costs, as Mark shared, rising at a faster rate on regionals, and particularly the large RJs over mainline, I'd say two things. One, we're in the middle of another iteration of mainline pilot negotiations, right? And so taking the picture now is not comparing effectively apples and apples. I don't know that historical differentiation between labor chasm on a regional jet versus mainline will settle exactly where it was. I'm sure that's the intention, but it's certainly going to go back up. Nonetheless, that has to be paid for one way or another, and has to be paid for by passengers willing to get on the airplane and give you a fare to cover it. And so in the end, these are rising costs and supply and demand. We've all been through economics. There's going to be fewer folks on that demand line willing to pay. So we're going to have a smaller network. And again, I don't think eVTOLs are going to change substantially the most economic solution to a 400-mile itinerary. That still is dominated by mid to large size RJs. And the only solution for that is a robust pilot supply like we've had.
Yeah. Like you've foreshadowed the answer to this question just a little bit, but my last one for you is looking ahead. How do you see the industry in 5 years or in 10 years, and how would you like to see it?
Well, the glass half full would say let's really stop the divided debate about the situation, and let's have meaningful conversation, and let's have it with people who have a vested interest and are objective about the circumstance, and again, not cater to special interests, but the interest of the entire aviation community and service to all communities in the United States, and let's restore it, and let's do it in a way that is safer than it has ever been before. We can. It's not lip service to say we can make continued advancements on safety through safety systems, through education, through training, and we can have a better and safer aviation system that is robust and drives value. That's the optimist. The pessimist says, we've been talking about this for 11 years now. We have all the evidence we need in terms of a pilot shortage. The communities are feeling it today, and yet current events tell us there's still an absence of objectivity. And we really just have to get there. And if we don't, it's going to be a difficult 5 years. And it's going to put us in a place where there are many missed opportunities in the United States for people to find affordable, convenient transportation. And the long-term consequence of that is economic, contraction. And think about debt levels in cities. Think about what that means to them, and it gets grim.
Well, I wish you would have ended with the optimistic.
Yeah,
but
I'm sorry, I'm not good at that.
but that's a good rallying cry for us. I think we're all together for the next couple of days, and we're going to talk about all these issues, and hopefully we'll stop admiring the problem and start solving it. Because it's time to do that. The best time to solve the pilot shortage was 10 years ago, but the second best time is now. So let's do it.
Agreed.
Dion, thank you very much. That was wonderful. I appreciate your chatting. I think that's a good transition to welcome your colleagues up to the stage. So first panel, please come on up. And Dion, again, I want to thank you for your incredible leadership during the last year.
Thank you, Faye.
All right.